Okay, we're live. Thank you so much. Apologies for being a little late, but hope you're all still here. I'll welcome you again to another episode of our 2024 Masterclass series. As a reminder, this series is the brainchild of Italians in VC and Made It podcast and is powered by BCG and Bizplace. And the theme of today's Masterclass is does company culture matter for a startup and how to build it? And we're here with Francesca Carlesi. Welcome to the Masterclass, Francesca.
Thank you, Camilla. It's a honor, a pleasure to be here, as usual.
And I'll give you a little bit of background on Francesca. But I'm sure everybody knows her already. Francesca is the current CEO of Revolut UK and the exited founder and CEO of Molo Finance, a fintech company that she started because she had her own frustrations with getting a mortgage. Molo raised over 270 million pounds in funding and then recently got acquired by Columbus Capital in 2023. Before Molo, Francesca spent more than 10 years in senior banking roles with the likes of Deutsche Bank and Barclays. She started her career in consulting and private equity at McKinsey & Co. and Bridgepoint Capital and holds a PhD in banking and finance from the University of Rome and an MBA with honors from Columbia University. I'll remind everyone that the beauty of the masterclass is that you can all also ask your own questions. There's a chat function on the right. You should see you should be able to post a comment. And if you post a comment at the end of the conversations that I will have with Francesca, I'll make sure to ask all of your questions. And we already had some questions ahead as people got registered for the masterclass. So thank you very much. So if you have any questions about your company cultures and how to start it, if you're facing any doubts, now it's your chance to ask directly a question. So really don't be shy and don't hesitate. And I'll get started first with our own questions. And I'll remind that the title of the masterclass was does company culture matter for a startup? So I really wanted to start there because often it is an element that founders maybe don't take as seriously at the beginning because there's so many challenges that you're trying to solve as a founder at the beginning, and maybe you don't spend a lot of time thinking about what type of company you want to be, what culture you want to build. But I wanna ask you first, Francesca, what is your definition of company culture? And do you actually believe it is crucial to start early with defining your culture if you want to build a multi-million-dollar company, or is it just a nice to have?
Okay, well, thank you, Camilla, and it's really a pleasure to be here. So, hi, everybody. Well, I'm very pleased and a little bit a special treat to talk about culture because it's not always the first topic that people kind of talk about. So, to answer your question, for me, the culture, let's talk about what it is and what is also not. So, the way I define it is kind of the set and the group of behaviors that in a company distinguishes how people act, right? As everybody, it's what people do, how they interact with each other, what they believe in. But more than the beliefs, in most cases, actually the behavior, what you actually do. So what culture is not for me is not a list of titles on the wall. Is not necessarily we have our values and then we behave completely different. It doesn't really matter, and it's not it's not something that needs to sound good, because that's what I notice. A lot of companies, they want to have very nice taglines that they put on the wall, and then maybe nobody believes in that. And what is also not is not necessarily something soft. That's also important, because a lot of people believe culture needs to be the opposite of having high performing team. Not necessarily. I mean, culture, you can have any culture, but not necessarily needs to be something nice and softy, and then all of a sudden nobody will perform. Okay, that's really, really important. So for me, culture is more about how people behave in a company, and usually is something that is unique to the company. So you step into the office, you're like, okay, I am at Molo, whatever, or I am at Facebook, right? So do I believe it's important? I actually think it's very, very important. And it's really interesting because in the journey in the last few years, I think I strengthened my belief in this. I always thought it was important, but my first life in a way was in big companies. And in big companies, I thought was important mentally, but never lived through what that really means. And so when you set up a new company, you have actually a privilege, in my view, which is you actually get to set up your own culture. So, and people will follow this, right? This would be like growing up a child, in my view. That's how I see it. It's almost like if you have a child, you define a lot of his behaviors and personality when he's very young, when he's, and this will define a lot of the success, but also a lot of how he or she will be when they grow up, right? So in a way, I have actually I could witness in the startup journey how relevant culture is, because if people really are rallying around the same core values, and this is really felt deeply, it can actually even save the company. That's as much as I would say, right? Because it's actually the core, the glue that keeps people together. And as a startup, you really need that, because it will always be bumps in the road. And having a strong culture, whatever there might be, which means effectively people feel they're part of a team and they're not just a sum of individuals, then this will allow them to almost overcome anything.
Yeah, and I feel like the when we talk to founders on Made It podcast, for instance, they, especially founders who are maybe already, past the initial challenges and into more of a scale up mode,
Yeah.
you always hear that the biggest challenge is how to keep the team together, how to scale, and how to bring the initial culture to more people. So we'll talk about how important it is to scale, but if it's important to scale, it means that you need to lay the foundations early for that to be successful. Because if you're already mid scaling and you're trying to put a culture together, I imagine that it's very, very even harder to get it across to more and more people. So, what's your view on that? When should founders start thinking about the type of culture that they want to have in their companies? And when you're a founder, you have this thrilling but difficult role that it almost all depends on you. So, I don't know how you do you have any suggestions on how to get started in thinking about your cultures
Yeah.
and when to get started in thinking about your culture?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting question. And probably there is not one size fits all. That would be my learning, right? So what you need to be careful is you shouldn't just set up the company and then the first thing you do is like, oh, we want a culture, and then you spend a lot of time thinking about what the culture is and again putting it on the wall. I think it needs to be a little bit spontaneous process, but at the same time it needs to be very intentional. So in terms of timing, I do think that is important, since it's very important actually since the early phase of a company to intentionally think, at least think, or be self-aware of what type of culture you want in that company. Because in that early stage, and especially in the funder needs to be that person. You cannot delegate to somebody. You cannot say, okay, let's hire a junior HR person and he or she will define the culture, because in reality, it doesn't really matter. It's about what you do every day. Culture is really about what you as a funder in the early stage and the people around you really do every day. What do you do when there is a crisis, especially? What do you do? Who do you fire? Who do you hire? How do you manage performance management? So all of these are signals that you're giving to the team. So in a way, in terms of behaviors, you should start from day one and thinking about, okay, if I do this, what signals am I sending to the team? Because that will translate in the company culture. In terms of codifying the behaviors, so really boiling down into what are the 5 things we believe in, which is typically what people think culture is, you can actually wait. You don't need to sit down on day one and write this down. In fact, I think it's actually better if you go with the flow a bit, get the core team around you, start adjusting it, see what are the tough choices and how you feel about them, and then gradually it will come natural and you realize, well, actually, this is what we stand for. And at that point, the point when you want to codify, document the culture, which usually boils down in some 5 values or do's and don'ts and things like that, it's better if you have a view, but you actually co-create it with a team that is the team at that time, right? So I would probably, and then after that, the team will grow. But if you kind of planted the right seeds, it will self-perpetuate, right? And then you'll have the core team that will act as an ambassador of culture. And then communication is very important to make sure that even if you have become a bigger team, everybody gets the same value and the same things. But I really distinguish between this concept of doing it, and that is from day one, to the concept of when you need to publish something or codify, and I would not rush that, because otherwise sometimes you also run the risk that you want to write something down and it's not what you really feel, is not what the company stands for. And
Yeah.
and that I think is, I found, was the right balance for me.
So I guess there's a need for self-awareness, I guess, at the beginning as
Yeah.
the founders, and making sure that your behavior reflects what you want everyone's behavior to be. So if you want your culture to be, for instance, like the very famous like no asshole rule. So if you want like a nobody can be an asshole in my company, then you need to make sure that you in the first place are not being an asshole, because otherwise you can't ask of other people that. So I
Yeah.
guess there's a bit of self-awareness and leading by example when you're the founder. Is that the right way to think
Yeah.
about it?
I think maybe coming on this is a very important point. So maybe it's worth to kind of highlight it, which is you should be under no illusion. So I think it's very important to reflect on the fact that the culture inevitably should, it's not like it's like a personality, right? And it will reflect a lot the founder's personality and what you believe in, not personality, but what you believe in, what your values is. So don't try to fit a box or to fit like a checklist or a cookie cutter, because at the end you really need, is very specific in the culture of the company you found, it needs to be molded around what your real beliefs are. So if you believe, we want to be really customer centric, or really believe in team play, I don't know, right, then that can be part of the culture. But if you don't believe in it, don't try to force it, because it will not come across, right? And then yes, and then every day, it is an everyday topic, which is every action you take, you kind of need to be very deliberate in thinking what is this aligned to the culture and what signal is sending. Because in reality, especially in a small company, especially the funder, you are a role model, and everybody will look it up to you. What I would say is that this seems very easy, but it's not easy at all, because, and then for me, the most difficult parts were when it gets to people decisions, at least in my experience, right? But I'm talking to various people, it seems like this is always a common denominator. It's about who do you hire, who do you fire, who do you promote. You find ourselves in a situation where we have people that might be great performers, but they're completely at odds with the culture. Or you're hiring somebody, you're looking for skill set, but you want to check the mindset. Maybe it's not the right mindset, not the right culture. And then you need to make a tough decision, because in the early days of a startup, you're very stretched. You have a lot to do, very few people, sometimes even difficult to convince people to join. So when you find somebody that's actually good that wants to join, it's very easy to shortcut and say, well, actually, it doesn't matter. It will adjust to the culture. But in reality, you need to be very, very tough with yourself and very disciplined, and make it a key criteria. So one thing we did at Molo, for example, we always had this in performance evaluation, for example, since the beginning, by the way, the concept of the what and the how. So you assess how, because it's important that you deliver on goals and objectives, but it's even more important, or at least equally important, the how you do it. So how was alignment to values and culture. And sometimes you find that if you're really disciplined around that, you might have to make tough decisions about people that actually are good from a performance point of view, but they don't fit, and that created a toxic culture, and you need to eradicate that. So that's what I think is important to keep in mind. At least in my experience, the culture is you. So you need to really be very deliberate. It needs to be really fitting what you believe, but then you need to walk the talk every single day. And the final thing I would add in terms of when it matters the most, people decision is one, and the other one is when you have difficult moments. So we, for example, Molo went through COVID. We went through a couple of shake-ups in terms of interest rates, the massive impact on our customer base. In this moment, which typically are moments of panic, and where even tough decisions it'd be okay to make them, then that's where you need to pause and say, well, whatever we do now will stick forever in the company culture. In 3 years' time, somebody will remember how we addressed COVID. Did we kind of laid off everybody, or did we sit down and discuss with everybody transparently what's happening? How do you react, right? So my suggestion would be difficult moments are, in a way, a great opportunity to cement the company culture if you do the right choices. Because if you say that you care about people, then those are the moments we need to show it. And if you do that, then you have created a bond that will last forever. But if you don't do that, it doesn't matter what you do afterwards, because you have created a breach that will also last forever, right? So there are some moments of truth that are great to cement and strengthen a company culture, but could also work the other way around, right?
I want to go back. We'll go back to the challenges point, and I also want to go back to the hiring point because I think that's really important, and I'm sure a lot of founders are struggling with that maybe right this very moment. But let's go to Molo for a second, and I wanted to ask you: what was Molo's culture like, and do you remember a little bit of some of the things that you went through in defining that culture, and any strategies that you use that you think might be helpful for people to hear in your
Yeah.
experience?
Yeah, so well, I remember a lot. I'm not, it was
It's
not
not
that
that
far
long
away,
ago.
so not that long ago. Um, so yeah, so I think at Molo, I think was okay in terms of what we wanted to stand for, what I really believed in. And remember, I started up Molo after spending a long time, so almost 15 years in big corporates, so in kind of banking, consulting. So for me, it was the first opportunity to really set up a new company from scratch. And I remember since day one, the key driver of what I really wanted to do, okay, was to set up a company and a great product. But there was a big driver for me, which was about people. So it was about setting up a team and a culture from scratch, because I've a little bit been frustrated about being in several companies, big companies. They always talk about culture, but you never change it. So I felt this kind of, in a way, privilege, but also duty to shape the best company culture ever and hire the right people, because it's a privilege, right? And you set up a company, you should also think, well, I should really take this opportunity. So for me, it's very important since day one. And the type of culture I wanted to have was a little bit what I want to stand for, which was about a company that is where people take ownership, think big, are really truly customer focused. For us was a big deal in an industry, in a sector which is mortgages, where, to be honest, a lot of time people don't even talk about the customer, right? So about customer centricity, taking ownership, thinking big, do it with passion. These were some of our values, and then working together. So team play was very important, right? And so at the end was about meritocracy a lot. So we don't want to have a company where there's a lot of politics. So people really, you need to do the right thing and then be rewarded for that. But then where people work together and help each other, but actually go the extra mile, and you dare to challenge in a way the status quo. That was also a very important point. So now all of these, the way we went about it is that on day one, you really need to build a company. So I don't think you should really spend too much time trying to write down in nice wording what you want to stand for, but effectively I had a view of what good looks like for me. So the first people that we hired in the company were people that kind of broadly, without having codified it, I thought, okay, it could work, like we could work together, and I believe the concept of they believed in the dream was very, very important, right? And what we did is like it was all about bringing together a group of people that would be like-minded. And then I think not even in year one, maybe in year two, at a certain point we had 15, 20 people, which is that size where we had a core group of kind of the more leadership team, but also a lot of other people. And then we felt the need to say, okay, we are growing. We're starting to suffer actually some of the pain points. So we now need to hire fast. And we're starting to see that we're starting to hire people, they're not great, maybe. So we need to codify. And so what we did an offsite, effectively. We did a couple of days with the whole team, and it was a little bit bottom up. Okay, so we said, okay, one of those workshops, which was moderated by somebody actually internally at the time, to say, okay, what is the culture that we want to publish? Right now, clearly there were some strong top-down views, but it came out from the team. And then we got the team to also everybody to share what, we came up with the 5 values, but then effectively we asked everybody what those values meant for them, right? So in a way, by that time, we already had a core group of people. We already had established in the doing what good looks like. I mean, it was kind of,
And it's
it
probably
was
a
already
good
in our DNA,
test.
right?
It's a
And
probably
then
a
we
good
can,
test to do it bottom up, because then you can see if what you thought was the company culture actually percolated to the whole
right,
team. So it's probably a good
right,
test to see was what Francesca wanted at day one, what
yeah.
is happening at year two at the company.
Exactly. And at that time, and then you could at that point write it down in a more polished way because it was more crystallized. So that's how we did it. And then effectively that actually helped because then we had these values on the wall all the time. They were we embedded it in our system. So as I mentioned before, all our people processes were around not only how good you are in doing your job every day, but also how you do it, how aligned are you to the company values. And that played a role, which is like at least 50%. So that meant that we ended up having to make tough choices on people just maybe because of the cultural fit, right? And not, really, sometimes we had a lot of discussions about somebody is really good, but it cannot, probably this is not the right place, right?
Yeah,
We
let's
embed
can
into the hiring process as well, right? So you need to embed it then. It shouldn't just stay on the wall in a way.
Can we talk about that? I want to talk about hiring because that's such an important way that
Yeah,
you can, as you said, you can control your company culture. Because if you're hiring people that don't fit your company culture, you're
yeah,
diluting that culture automatically because those people are not
yeah,
going to walk the talk that you're talking and
yeah.
walking. And we had a question from a founder, Davide Villano from Ring 33, that, for instance, asked, like, we are creating our team and hiring our first employees and finding
Yeah.
it challenge uh, to understand how to create the right company culture. So I feel like that's the first time where founders maybe really, really need to think, like, are coming to terms with the idea that they need to think about culture because they're hiring. Do you have any tips on how to think about hiring? Like you said, the
Yeah.
how and what, like, is there anything else that you did that worked well in terms of making sure you were hiring the right people?
Okay. I think the what and how is more for us was more later, right? When people are on board. On hiring, I think what the journey we went on, at least I went on, was that you really need to make sure you are honest with yourself and you kind of clarify what you're hiring for. And for us, what worked well is to shift from hiring from skills for skill set only to hiring for skill set and mindset, and being very deliberate about that. So, which means that in the screening, when you look at people, of course, you screen and you look for people based on a CV. It does help if you look through referrals. Referrals always better because by definition, the people that know you will always refer people that may be more similar to the way you think. So hiring through referrals helps a lot because already you're attracting more similar people in general. Second, when you do decide, okay, what type of people we want to make an effort in the job description on your internal, thinking to say, okay, culture fit or mindset needs to be one of the dimensions, and then you need to define it based on how you are. Just look into yourself. You don't need to have define everything. Just see how are you, what good looks like for you. You want somebody very driven, or you want somebody very, I don't know, a team player, right? So that's, and then codify and make sure in the recruiting process, even in a piece of paper, but you have that written down, and then you force yourself to say, okay, this person I just met, how that person even has fantastic CV, but how does it fit vis-a-vis this criteria? Um, and so
Did
that
you, as a founder,
that's,
did you do the first interviews with everyone? Were you interviewing, or
yeah,
was
of course,
everyone interviewing? How, is
yeah.
there anything there that's important to talk about? Did you have
Well, I
questions
think
that you
that's,
really liked that helped you
yeah.
get out some answers about culture fit?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So first of all, you need to be involved in interviewing for a long time. I think a big part of your time as a founder, at the beginning, but for a while, maybe even up to 50% of your time should be on people topics. And at the beginning is a lot of hiring. So don't delegate that either, because you cannot. I mean, it's very important that team, especially the initial team, you're the only ones that has this ability to understand what really works, right? So spend time on hiring and spend time on talking to people, and even people maybe just create a little bit of a virtual bench. More people you talk to, the better. In terms of, in addition to this, right, the way, how do you bring it to life? I think usually for me is about asking about previous experience, like how in a certain situation the candidate dealt with it, right? So previous experience, especially moment of difficulties. If you know already what type of what you're doing, and you can anticipate what the challenges will be for that person, maybe asking them how they faced similar challenges in the past, it tells you a lot about how they reacted. What did they do? Did they panic, or did they kind of stepped out of the game? Did they take risk when they were faced with a choice, or they didn't? And then you kind of understand a lot there as well, right? So asking about one thing and say, what was your biggest challenge, or what was your biggest success, and why did it make you happy? So it's a lot about understanding the why people did some things, rather than just do the usual interviews, right? How good you are in this skill set, right? So that it's about going back in history and then get people to open up and understand how they react to certain things. That's very, very important.
Especially because, especially if you're hiring at the beginning, maybe more senior people, they'll have prior experiences. They will have worked in different companies, and maybe those companies will have shaped their own ways of working and culture. So, how much you look at past experiences, and I guess you're asking the questions, right? So if maybe you're worried
Yeah.
that the person worked in a very I don't know, maybe like in a very structured place, like a consulting company, you want to make sure that they're also like
Yeah.
entrepreneurial. You want to test for the things that you're maybe more worried about that specific person, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know, absolutely. I think there are some bias there. So I always try to be neutral and not be affected too much, because there are some stereotypes, okay, in the industry, especially in the venture capital industry, in startup land, which is if you come from a big company, for example, you might not be a good fit for a startup. Maybe in a big percentage of the cases is true, but I tried also always to look through, because it's also through the opposite. So I think I look at the CV mostly to understand the experience level, because you need experience in some roles, right? You just cannot just make it up in some roles. But then effectively to understand how somebody thinks and how they would address challenges of the situation, usually the interview, and so the questions are more helpful. And I try to, so let's say the following: if somebody has only done a big banking job for like 15 years, clearly I might challenge, I might probe a little bit more his ability or her ability to be entrepreneurial. So I'm asking, have you ever done something from scratch, even in your personal life, right? Or did you have any big challenge to overcome in your job? Because clearly you have less evidence that, that can survive or thrive in an entrepreneurial environment. But I try not to be biased against this, right? In a way. So if somebody has had a different experience, has jumped around a little bit and done in big banks or big companies, and then more smaller companies, it gives me a high degree of comfort. But at the same time, I try to be not too comfortable and still ask and see how they react to challenges, right? So I think you need to be very deliberate when you hire people. Know that you being good in terms of knowledge of experience is not enough, and then carve out time and focus of your mind and try to be not biased, but to assess also mindset, and be willing to let go some candidates if the second aspect doesn't work, which is the most difficult part, I guess, sometimes.
How much does it matter if you like a person? Like, do you try to say, like, do I want to have dinner with this person? Is he nice, or is she fun? Like, not fun and nice are not the right words, but do you care about how, if everyone in the team likes her or him, for instance? Like, is there
So,
that
so
that
it's an
sort
interesting
of
thing
gut
because,
feeling. I don't know, it's hard to
yeah,
describe, but sometimes I think that it's great to work with people that you know maybe want to have lunch with
yeah,
or go away with for a weekend, but
right.
sometimes I'm like, does that bring in a bias that you're only hiring people that are like you, and that creates maybe less difference of thought? I don't know if you have thoughts about that.
No, so maybe I'll say two things. So one is I actually think it does matter if you like somebody, not like more in general, but you need to be, probably the odds are you're going to work a lot together, sometimes maybe very late at night. So you do need to have some level of personal bonding. It needs to work, right? So I actually think it is very, very important that you have I don't know, like more emotional connection, not emotional in a crazy way, but you need to kind of broadly like each other. And in fact, I actually think it's a very good idea, especially for some roles, but honestly, I almost recommend for most roles at the early stage of the journey to meet, not just in an office environment, but effectively go for dinner, go for drinks, meet for lunch, and spend really time, because in those, that's where you see how people really are and they let go a bit. And that's where you talk about other things, about family or friends and so on, and you understand whether you could gel. Could I spend a lot of time with this person and actually have fun? You need to have fun at the end, right? So I think this setting the meeting, the interviews in the first stage or start by session in a more social or a more casual environment is super helpful. Is actually, I would highly recommend it. I think the other thing, though, that connected to your point, we need to be careful not to have group thinking, but also not to hire always people that are all the same. And probably that was one of the hardest lessons I learned in my experience in Molo, which is, especially as a founder, especially when you're thinking about how you build your leadership team, it's really important that you have complementarity in that. So when you look for somebody and you're hiring somebody, you need to think not only about, is this person really good in what he or she does? Then, of course, is this person has the right mindset, but also, is this person the right fit for my leadership team? Which means that if you already have a certain type of personalities in your team, and you add somebody that could be an explosive mix, you probably should not hire that person. Now, it sounds odd because I didn't think this should be a criteria. I never thought about this before being a startup, but unfortunately it does matter, because when you're in a startup at the beginning, the leadership team is really core. I mean, it's really the rock on what everything hangs together, right? So if there are conflicts there, it's the death for the company. So the way you overcome that is, first you need to form your view, but then second, we always see and model for a long time in reality, especially at the beginning, for a long time, even after you almost made up your mind about a person, we always set up some, we kind of call them meet and greet meetings, but in fact, they always should meet the team. And sometimes they would actually meet their team, their future team, meet all the other people, the leadership team, meet other key stakeholders. They need to get along with everybody, not with everybody, but you need to find that they actually come in the team and they feel at home, or they're not, and that matters. And if it doesn't work, you might need to be willing to not go ahead.
And there's a question here from the audience. I'm going to put it up because I think it fits really well in what we're talking about. So Paolo
Yeah.
G is asking, what kind of person should you not hire in a startup or in startups in general? I know it's a very maybe broad
Yeah.
question, so I don't know if there's anything that comes to mind on like people that you tried not to hire because you didn't think they would be the right fit. And I know it's hard to generalize, but maybe some backgrounds or personality traits or
Yeah. Okay. It is very general, because I think at the end, probably everybody has a role if they're like in a complementary team in a way. However, if we need to find a pattern, I think probably one type of personality, one type of person, usually is very difficult. At least I actually struggle with making it work, especially in an early stage startup, is the type of people that are very, very um, rigid in the approach. They need to plan everything ahead, and if there is a little bit of a hiccups, then they go crazy, which we actually had in the team, and it didn't work out. That's why I'm saying this. So I think in general, for example, it's not bad to be very organized, very structured, a planner in a way, and wanting to have everything. It's actually a good thing, but I just think the early stage of startup, things change every day. There's always the emergency of the day. There's always something you're not planned. And so if you have that need to have everything under control and to have a stable situation, it could create it could create some problems, right? And probably it's not the right place, at least in the early stage of the journey. That's what I would say. But
And we'll move on from hiring, but it's such a big topic and an important one, especially when you're thinking about culture. But you talked about being ready to fire people that don't fit your company culture. So after you've gone through all of the hiring process, it is natural that sometimes you might make a mistake in the hiring process. You might hire someone that seems like a great fit, but when they start working, it doesn't work with the team, or they're not the right person. How important is it to fire people that don't work, especially in the early stages of a company?
Okay, so this is really a very important topic, I think, and probably something where I struggled for a while. So in a way, when you struggle, you learn a lot, and so happy to share a view, right? So there is this kind of saying in startup land, which is should hire slow and fire fast, which is actually a little bit draconian, but in a way is partially true. So what I found is that in a small company, especially early stage, every person counts, every person matters, every person is creating a company culture, because there are very few people, and beside you, what you do every day creates a company in a way. So if you have the wrong person there, it's actually much more impactful than if you are in a big company and okay, there are 10,000 people and there's one wrong person is not going to impact the company. So in a startup, when everything is kind of very embryonic stage, it does matter a lot. So that's why you need to take action quite quickly if it doesn't work, because the impact is not just that person is underperforming or that person. It depends, right? If it's not working because it's performance or because of mindset, but in both cases, the damage created is broader, it's bigger than just the person, right? So it's not just non-performing his role or her role. You are setting a role model, which is the wrong role model for everybody else. Because typically you have 10 people, everybody's working very like crazy. And if you have one person actually not really putting the effort, gradually he or she will drag everybody down. Because of course, you're setting a standard, you're effectively telling everybody, the worry doesn't matter. There are no consequences if you're not really putting all the effort, right? Similarly, if you have this person or two or whatever, they even great performance, but it's creating a toxic culture. So it's like maybe backstabbing people, creating politics, or like, I don't know, doing exactly the opposite you want them to do. Unfortunately, the halo effect of that is massive. So you really need to stop it right away. And sometimes it's difficult. I think it is difficult because at the beginning, your core team is really, everybody is a critical role. So letting people go, you really feel could have a perverse impact, because could slow down what you need to do, but also it could create bad optics with investors. That's what I thought, right? At the beginning, it was really good. If it's really bad if we fire everybody now, right? So it's not good. So, but reality, you need to be able to, it's a short-term pain that is kind of avoiding a long-term impact that could be much more radical in a way, right?
And as I said, moving on a little bit from hiring and firing, but another big challenge that I think startups face right now is the fact that a lot of startups choose to set their workplace to be fully remote, which is great. It's something that we were able to do after COVID. We learned that we could all work remotely, which means you can get talent from anywhere in the world and you can give your employees flexibility to work from wherever they want. But I also do think that it makes transmitting your company culture to all these people that work either all around Italy or all around the world particularly complicated. Even for a large corporate, it is hard when people are working remotely. So Are there practices that you would recommend that startups adopt to keep the team connected and engaged, even if they're remote? Was I don't remember, was Molo remote or partly remote? And did you have anything that you did that worked well for you guys?
Okay, no, very happy to talk on this. Also because I feel like went to a personal journey on this topic, right? So I'm a little bit old school. So originally, when I started Molo, I was, was really, no, I wouldn't say against, but we're not really supporting work from home or like remote working, because also I think when you have a smaller company, you really need to be, side by side, rolling up your sleeves, and actually there's a lot of culture gets created in that way. So, and then what happened in our journey is that, so that's how we started, by the way. So we're all in the same place, working hard, but also having fun, right? So, and then COVID hit and we had to go fully remote. And so in a way it was a necessity. And then gradually it took like 2 years to go back to a more normal pattern, which was never normal, because in reality, right now in at least in UK, people are in the office 2 to 3 days a week, right? And now I'm working Revolut, which is effectively a fully remote company. So there is not even an attempt to bring people in the office back. Is a fully remote. You can be wherever you want. In fact, actually, you can even be abroad. You can actually spend 6 months abroad and work from there. Nobody really cares. So it's really been a very interesting journey for me. So if I reflect on the transition, especially Molo, what do you do, right? So I think there are a couple of observations. On one side, so yes, so it does have an impact. Being in the same place helps with setting up a company culture. There's no doubt, because we are humans at the end. It's not just about, if you are in front of a video call, you become very transactional. You don't even know anything about the other person because you're doing a call for specific goals. If you are in the office, you learn so much more about the person. You can go for a drink. You can even create moments where you talk about something else. So I think to set up a company culture, proximity, I think it helps a lot. For example, at Molo, when we switched to remote, because we had a strong company culture, it was great because people were really hanging out together. What we did to keep everybody together, we always maintain our whole hands meeting every week. And we also had a situation where we had to kind of follow some people. So we made it a point. I decided, okay, we always will have not only our whole hands, which is kind of a business meeting, but we set up a more social Friday wrap-up meeting on Friday afternoon, which was completely not to talk about business. And people share what they were doing, the projects. We kind of even played games. Really, it was very remote, but it actually helped a lot. So even in a remote environment, finding a way to connect beyond work is very, very important. And that's actually matters a lot. Now, if you are anyway remote and so on, what I would do, how do you do it? I think my suggestion would be, one is, well, if you're a really early stage of a company of 3 people in a room, I would really try to advise that you spend some time together, no matter what, right? Then later on, if you want to go fully remote, and actually that does have a lot of flexibility, make sure you bring people together at least every once in a while. So first of all, have some cadence in the company meetings, but then maybe every month have a social event, or every quarter bring people together for it doesn't matter where they come from, but in the same place, in the same office, one day or two, because this bonding is too important. So at least in that way.
Yeah, I'll give an example. I was talking to a founder that was saying that their company's fully remote, and with the money that they save on not having an office, then once a quarter they fly everyone to a location that's fun, just to have team building and fun and drinks and lunches, and also talk about the direction of the company. But a big part is just social, so that you can get people together, people then like each other, and they'll then continue that relationship in their own time beyond the video call. So that can be a strategy. You're saving on rent, but you're flying people out to a hotel for a few days, etc.
And I think you need to do it. Don't think it's a waste of time or money. Just be disciplined around it, because this goes a long way. And it's really the social part. So it's good to talk about business, but you also want to maintain alive that connection and so on, right? Um, yeah, I think these are the main things. So, and then also, I think if you are remote, beside bringing people together once in a while, I think you need to do an extra effort of communication. And communication really matters a lot. The difference is that if you are all in the same room, in the same place, kind of communications happens by itself. For example, you'll have your values on the wall, you could have a roadmap on the wall, you catch up for coffee. And like, for example, in Molo, we used to have always Friday, we always had a Friday lunch together. I don't know, we would order pizza and then we'd have a game, right? So naturally you do many more things if you are in the same place. If you're not, I think you need, as a founder, especially if a leader or a leadership team, you need to think about it and specifically be very deliberate to make sure you not only bring people together every once in a while, but you do have certain type of meetings to communicate, to make everybody aware, for example, the big picture, what's happening in the company, what are key decisions we are taking, or reiterate some message about what matters, what doesn't matter, right? So, which means you need to really be very much more deliberate and specific, but communication is very, very important. And maybe even you feel that you're repeating always the same things, but that's how you kind of get people behind you, and you get people to actually realize actually that we are on a journey, and everybody needs to see the journey at every point in time.
And I will call on people to ask questions. I see there's a few in the chat, but don't be shy. Ask your questions. It's your chance to ask maybe questions that you're pondering yourself. Even it's very specific to your startup. We're happy to maybe think about it together. So don't be shy. But there's a couple that I'll maybe transition and I'll wrap up with a few more questions. There's a couple that I want to make sure we get to. Let's start with the last one, maybe. We talked about firing, and Giacomo Rossi's asking, what is the best way to fire someone in a startup? So I don't know if there is a way beyond just telling them that, I don't know. Also depends on where you are. I guess Italy versus the UK, labor laws are very different. So it's important that you know what you're facing in terms of firing.
Yeah, give me 1 second. I think the light, it goes off every once in a while. So, I don't know what you mean best in terms of the human impact. I would say the following. So for me, probably if you park any legal consideration, because clearly different countries, different, legal situations, but in terms of the human impact and also the company impact, what I would say is actually transparency. That's what comes to mind to me. So effectively, I think the best way I found is that you just, first of all, is making the time and acknowledging that this is an important moment. Don't just fire people on the sides whilst you're busy doing other things, because it is a significant impact, right? Unless something dramatic happened. But second is be very open and transparent and own the decision. That's the other thing, because when you communicate, take the time, explain the why. Don't kind of sugarcoat, don't blame it on somebody else, like the board decided, right? Just, you need to own the decision and explain the why. And honestly, a lot of times maybe, explain that this is about fit. It could be bad performance, but in reality, sometimes it is really about saying, listen, it's not about you, it's effectively what we need in this moment in time. And it's a special company, whatever. So talking about the fact that there's a fit problem helps, but also being very transparent and caring, in my experience, is very, very important. And what I would add then is to think carefully together with the person about the communication to the team. That's usually the most painful part, especially when you have a group or a small team. So typically what I always did is that once the decision is taken and, we kind of decide how to move forward, you agree together the steps, the timing, and the content of how this is communicated to the rest of the team. Because again, you shouldn't hide that you're firing something. It's not about firing, but you could say, you need to agree on a same communication, but then communicate in a timely manner to everybody, because everybody will know anywhere very quickly. So make sure you, again, own the decision. The team understands why, has access, and can talk to you if needed, but don't have people that to dry, right? Don't just blame somebody for something. So that's what I would say. But it's about care, transparency, and do the right things at the end.
There was another question that was asked by, I'm sorry, I don't
Yeah.
remember. I didn't write down the name of the founder, but the founder was asking, and you talked about this a little bit in your intro speech.
Yeah.
So I think it's worth wrapping up with it. Can a high performance and healthy culture coexist? So the idea that, as you said, like maybe culture is seen as like the soft thing, and if it's you're being so
Yeah.
nice with everyone, then it's not high performing. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's super interesting because I think there is a preconcept on this, right? So I would say absolutely yes. In fact, only they could coexist, but effectively they help each other, in my view, because culture does not mean that all of a sudden you're nice to everybody and you just kind of relax and nobody does anything. As for me, it's like thinking about a sport team. Like if you think about a soccer team, um, if to win, everybody wants to win. To win, you need to put into it the hard work, and you want to have high performing the best athletes, right? And then the best athletes want to be with the best athlete, they want to win. So in reality, and then you're really building a cohesive team, you can build a culture around that. But it doesn't mean that if you have a good culture, you have to have bad athletes. So it's actually the opposite. So I would say absolutely yes, but probably take away this preconcept that culture means not being performing, right? The coach is what you define, and you could define, by the way, that's perfectly fine. You're just setting up this company for something that is like more of a lifestyle choice, which is okay. And then it's a certain type of culture and at a certain point, there's a certain type of performance expectations, but that's a very specific case. Otherwise, these two things go hand in hand. In fact, I think they really fuel on each other if you have the right culture and the right performance aspirations in a way.
Great. Let's wrap up the masterclass with the last question from Edo Gentili, which goes back a little bit to our hiring discussion. So, are drive and ambition more important than experience when hiring for early stage startups?
Well, I think yes, I would say yes. It depends a little bit on the role, however. So, in general, drive and ambition, in my view, fit into what I call this mindset bucket, which is you need to be eager, you need to want to change the role and believe in it, and be a little bit of a dreamer, but also want to, have resilience and grit and all that. That matters a lot. So we a lot in Molo, we kind of took decisions in specific roles to maybe hire personnel less experienced many times, but was so driven, and we thought, he or she can learn what needs to be learned, but you cannot substitute the mindset and the drive, right? So I think I would say yes, if you have to generalize. I think though for some roles, especially maybe in the regulated industry, maybe we need to differentiate. If you need to hire somebody that is a risk person that needs to go in front of regulators, maybe you need to make sure he or she has some experience. I wouldn't say 25 years but some experience it needs to be there, right?
I guess it depends, yeah, what seniority level.
Yeah.
If it's a very junior hire, I would say 100% drive and ambition.
Yeah.
Probably that's all you really, really need.
Yeah.
And if it's a more specific senior hire, then it's obviously a more of a balance
Yeah.
of both.
Yeah, and maybe just to clarify here, not to leave, with the wrong impression. I think typically it's not a black and white situation. It's not that you need to choose between a person with lots of experience and zero
Hopefully
mindset,
you get
or
both.
yeah, you usually, what I found the real difficulties usually is you have for a role, let's say given a CFO role, you have two people that one of them is kind of as a massive track record, has done the CFO before, and maybe it's a little bit more relaxed. And then you have somebody that's slightly 2 steps behind, so it still has some experience, but has never really done that role fully, but actually has a lot of drive and ambition to do it. And how you act in that moment make a massive difference. We had this dilemma many, many times. Most times we went for the drive and ambition, but we still had a solid professional, right? But it's tempting. It can be tempting to go for what people think is a safe option, to go for experience. Okay, he's done that before. The problem is that in a startup environment, that might not be the safer option, because you want somebody who's also dynamic and can adapt quickly.
Great. We're at time, and I can't thank you enough, Francesca, for dedicating your time to give back and talk about this important topic. I hope it was very helpful for the people who joined, but I'll also remind that this will become a podcast episode, and so hopefully a lot more people will be able to listen to it and learn from you. We know you're a busy woman, so we really, really appreciate your time and expertise. And it was such a broad topic. There was so much
Yeah.
more that I wanted to cover, but we might have to do a part two on how to scale a culture, which we didn't really get to talk to, but hopefully we covered the basics in this chat.
Thank you, Camilla. Thank you, everybody. It was really a pleasure to chat again. And yeah, we're happy to do part two. It is an important topic, so keep it in mind, and it can make a difference for your startup.
Thank you so much, Francesca. Thanks, everyone.